Go ahead, Ashish. The floor is yours.
Oh, all right. Yeah, thanks, Prithvi. Uh, just give me 1 second. I'm bringing up the slide deck. Are you guys able to see the slide?
Yes, we are.
Hey, Prithvi, I'm sharing my screen. Can you please confirm if everyone is able to see it? Okay, great. Hi,
Yes, we
everyone.
are.
This is Ashish Jain. I'm a program manager with Azure Networking team, and it's a pleasure to talk to you about Azure Bastion today, which is a new service that we recently announced in public preview. And what the service does is essentially it enables a browser-based RDP SSH to your VMs, to your workloads, potentially running anywhere. So without further ado, let me begin. The agenda that we will be covering today is we'll take a look at security aspects, the whys and hows of Bastion host, followed by a quick peek at the architecture, and then we'll take a quick look at demo in terms of what's available and what's coming, and then we'll take a quick glimpse of our roadmap from a Bastion standpoint. What's our vision, what's our roadmap, and where we want to take Bastion going forward. So from a security standpoint, uh, one of the key goals for Azure Bastion is to protect the VMs from getting exposed to internet for as simple use cases as connecting to the VMs for the purposes of RDP or SSH. Typically, how customers go about doing RDP to their VMs running in cloud or running in Azure today is either they end up exposing the VM to a public IP to internet, or they invariably end up provisioning a jump box. So they RDP into the jump box, and then from the jump box, they end up doing further RDP into the VM. In either of the cases, either the experience is not great because the customers have to manage the jump boxes, they have to manage provisioning of those jump boxes, managing security of it, managing hardening it, updating it, managing its availability, redundancy, scalability. It becomes a challenge in terms of managing that jump box on their own. And exposing a VM to public internet specifically for the purpose of RDP is calling for trouble. So one of the key goals for Azure Bastion is to provide a managed service that takes care of all these concerns. And one of the prime goals in doing that for Bastion is to restrict the protocol traffic within the VNet. For instance, last year in May, most of you guys would already know that there was a vulnerability identified in RDP protocol, which enabled a malicious user on the same network as RDP client to potentially hijack an ongoing RDP session by becoming a man in the middle. So, and this is just one example. There have been protocol vulnerabilities, new ones, they keep on getting identified. It's like a cat and mouse game. But regardless, with Azure Bastion, what we want to do is we want to shield the RDP protocol or any protocol traffic for the purposes of Bastion and contain it within the VNet. So what goes over public wire is HTTPS, and from the bastion to the target VM to which you want to connect to is really the RDP, and that's contained within your VNet. So the prime goal is for the protocol traffic to be contained within the VNet. As we move forward with Azure Bastion, one of the key goals for us is to integrate Azure Bastion with AAD, with Azure Active Directory. And that serves us multiple purposes. For RDP, that means seamless identity and credential management, so that you can use your AD credentials for a single sign-on experience to your VMs using Azure Bastion. For Linux based VMs or for your SSH based connectivity, what this means is that Bastion can provide a seamless SSH key management experience so that customers don't have to worry about managing keys. As the more number of VMs increase, as the number of users connecting to them increase, the number of keys also increase. And uh, Azure Bastion with integrating with AAD will ensure that there is a seamless key management, SSH key management experience available, and customers don't have to worry about managing those keys. And they get the similar experience of using AAD-based auth uh, uh, to connect to their sessions to the VMs running in Azure. Also, what we want to do with that is we want to provide support for ephemeral identity. Now, ephemeral identity is something that we use internally for our Azure DevOps as well. So for instance, if there is a customer who reports an issue that, I'm not able to do such and such with my VM, or there is essentially a customer reported incident that an Azure engineer needs to log into customer's VM to see what's going wrong and potentially collect logs to troubleshoot and diagnose the issue. What we do internally is we use just-in-time access. Now that's not the JIT NSG or the JIT experience that you may be familiar with from Azure Security Center perspective. That's more of an internal thing that we have that we use right now, which we call just-in-time access. It's an internal service. What that does is whenever an engineer needs to log in to a customer VM for troubleshooting purposes, excuse me. So the internal just-in-time service, it creates a temporary user on customer's VM, and those user credentials can be used by the Azure engineer to log into the VM, collect logs, do what needs to be done to fix the problem. And then once the session ends, the internal just-in-time service goes ahead and deletes that user identity from the customer VM. We want to bring the same advantage of ephemeral identity to our customers through Azure Bastion. So the experience will be something like this, that Azure customers can enable, so this will be an optional feature. So Azure Bastion customers can enable ephemeral identity. So once they enable it and request an RDP or a session, a temporary user for the purpose of the session will get created on the target VM, and a session will be given back to the user with that identity. Once the session ends, that identity is deleted from the VM by the Azure Bastion service, so that once the session ends, there is no identity left anywhere whatsoever for anyone to compromise. So your identity is never delivered outside Azure. It's contained, it's ephemeral in nature, and it's transient, and it's deleted once the session ends. So that's ephemeral identity. By integrating with AAD, some of the other experiences we want to enable is for instance, enable a two-factor auth experience. So imagine using a phone authentication or other forms of multi-factor authentication to get to your VM using Azure Bastion. We are building Azure Bastion as an extensible service, which means that the authentication that is used by Azure Bastion is also extensible. AAD integration will also be implemented as a plugin of sorts to Azure Bastion. And at some point in time, we will enable or expose that interface of integrating authentication plugins with Azure Bastion to our developer ecosystem, so that they can build their own custom plugins and host it on Azure Marketplace, and our customers can benefit from those plugins should they choose to use it. And as we integrate with AAD, we'll get the benefit of role-based access control as well for authorizations to control what users can connect to what VMs using Azure Bastion. So that's RBAC integration that's in the works. Now, from an audit and monitoring standpoint, today, if you're not using any external solution or any third-party solution, and if you take a look at RDP, the auditing experience that customers have today on Azure is once the RDP session ends, the administrator logs into the VM, goes to event viewer, and takes a look at what events or what logs came up in that session in that time window. And from those logs, take a best educated guess of what could have happened in that session. We believe with Azure Bastion, we can really take that experience to next level. So we hope to provide a full video recording of RDP and SSH session through Azure Bastion and make it available to our customers. Now, the way we want to do that is we want to make sure that these videos are kept secure and private and only in the hands of our customers. So Microsoft will not have access to these videos. They will be stored in customer's storage account, encrypted with customer storage keys. But really the idea is that you get a full video of the RDP and SSH session, giving you a complete view of what happened in the session from an audit standpoint. Not just from audit, from a monitoring standpoint also, a live view is something that we will make available for ongoing sessions. I'm sorry, is there a question?
Hey guys, if you're not talking, please go on mute, please.
So that's full RDP SSH session audit. For SSH, we hope to also provide console-based text capture as well for the commands executed. This will not capture the passwords, but only just the commands and the output, so that from a diagnostic logs perspective, administrators can get a view of what all commands were executed and can search them as text as well, as opposed to just video. So these are all the security implications of Azure Bastion. And let me go ahead and briefly talk about the high-level architecture for the service. So like any other gateway service today on Azure, be it a VPN gateway, be it an express route gateway, be it an application gateway or firewall or other similar services, Azure Bastion is also a VNet injected service. What that means is that once you deploy an Azure Bastion resource in your subscription, what happens is that we create the underlying compute in our subscription, but we inject the Bastion into your subscription, into your virtual network, which means the Azure Bastion uses or becomes part of your IP address space in your VNet. Once injected in your VNet, it is part of an Azure Bastion subnet. That's a hard requirement for us right now. We'll talk through why this is a hard requirement later, but for now, this is the subnet that you will need to create. Once you create Azure Bastion resource in this VNet and in the subnet, and once it's created, the Bastion experience becomes available to all the VMs in this VNet. So what happens is, from the portal, when you're setting up the connection, you send a connect request from portal to Azure Bastion over port 443. This comes over internet. And based on that request, Azure Bastion authorizes and authenticates, assures the right request coming from portal for the user for that identity. It then, in isolation, starts a session between the Bastion and the target VM. And the endpoints for that session for RDP or SSH are Bastion and your VM. The traffic from that session is translated to a custom protocol and then sent over HTTPS back to the session. Now, if you recall the first thing from the previous slide, that Azure Bastion contains the protocol traffic within the VNet. So the RDP protocol traffic, as you would notice here, is part of the VNet only, and it never leaves the VNet. The RDP packets are never leaving the VNet. They are translated into a custom protocol and sent over 443. Now, from a security standpoint, there are couple of things that you can do. One, you can put an energy on your target VM subnet so that you can enable port 3389 or port 22 on the target VM subnet only for Azure Bastion subnet, so that only Azure Bastion can initiate RDP or SSH connections to these target VMs. So that's one level of hardening that you can do. The second level is, should you choose to put an NSG on the Azure Bastion subnet, you can restrict what public IP addresses can connect to Azure Bastion. So once the signaling is done, once the connection is set up, then the user's browser, the web browser, is directly talking to Bastion, and the portal comes out of the data path. Now this NSG you can put to set up any extra control or security that you want to restrict from an internet standpoint. So you can, for instance, say, okay, allow 443 internet only for these public IPs, and those public IPs could be, for instance, from your on-premise public internet connectivity. So, and should you choose to put energy here, we have some guidelines so that you do not break Azure Bastion. There are 2 service tags that you need to enable. We've documented that. We can chat about that later. So as part of the best practices, please set up those NSGs as well, those rules as well in this NSG. Uh, and then this is for RT and SSH as well. The session is created between the Azure Bastion and the target. Okay, so let's get to a quick demo. So we will take a look at what's available in preview and what's coming in future. So what I have here is a Windows VM. So let me first come to my VNet. Prithvi, just a quick check. Are you still able to hear me and see my screen?
Yes, I think we lost audio for a second, but you're back now.
Okay, great. Thanks for confirming. All right, so here what you see is my resource group that has Bastion provisioned, and it's created in my VNet. I have a couple of VMs here. And like I said, once you provision Bastion in your VNet, the Bastion experience is enabled for all VMs in your VNet. So here I come on a VM. I've navigated to a VM called MyWin VM. And as you would notice here, there's no public IP here on this VM. And Azure Bastion has integrated with the Connect experience. So you click on Connect. Now at this point in time, the platform checking my VNet in which my VM is located. Now, platform is checking in this VNet, is there a Bastion deployed or not? If it's deployed, then a Bastion tab shows up in the Connect slider as the default option, and then you can enter credentials here. So I'm going to enter credentials here for my RDP session, and I click on Connect. I'm on not so great internet, so it's taking some time. But this opens the RDP session here. Give it another few seconds. So what's happening right now is the first time this will happen. This will download a HTML5 based web client that will initiate the session and then connect me to the VM to my RDP session. So here it is. It's authenticated. It's given me a session right here in the browser over HTTPS. And if I use it, you would notice that it's a fully functional shell experience for full Windows experience for RDP as you would expect from RDP into a VM. Now we do support copy paste as well. So if you copy some text from your local machine into the session, you can do that. For Chrome and Edge Chromium, this is natively integrated. So when you first visit this link, it will say that the website is trying to access clipboard APIs, and once you allow it, the seamless copy paste experience will work for you. At the moment, we support only text, but going forward, we will enable support for file copy as well. Now, let me come back to another VM, which is a Linux VM. Again, you would notice here that there is no public IP on this VM. And I click on Connect, it's detecting that the Bastion is deployed in this VNet, shows up the Bastion tab, and it's asking me to give the credentials. We do support username, password, SSH key as well. And then you can browse the SSH key from a local file too. And I will enter credentials here and say connect. Excuse me. And as you would expect, a SSH session comes here, right here in the browser. And if you would see that it's SSH over private IP. Again, here we do support copy paste as well seamlessly. So just to illustrate as an example, the same text I can copy paste here, and vice versa works as well. So this is something that's available in preview right now. and in 6 regions. So you can go to Azure portal, you can go to aka.ms/bastion host and search for Bastion and create a new Bastion resource in your VNet. Once you do that, this experience that you just saw for RDP and SSH is available out there as public preview for you to use. Now, just to give you a glimpse of where we are headed and where we are taking Azure Bastion, this is still early bits. We're still working on it, but just to give you a sense of uh, what's cooking in our kitchen, uh, this is just to show you 2 more quick demos. So here you would see I have another VM called WinVM2. It doesn't have a public IP, and I click on connect here. And as I click on connect, you would notice that it's asking me for a phone authentication. I say call me. It's going to call my phone.
Welcome to Azure by Frost Bridge. If you were not expecting this call, please hang up. Otherwise, press any key on your phone to log. Thank you. Goodbye.
And once I authenticate to the phone, I get to my RDP session right here in the browser. And to give you a second scenario view, here I have another VM, which is not on Azure. It's logically represented here in, and the private IP of that VM, as you will notice, is it's a private IP. And this VM is running in AWS. We click on Web Connect. And you would notice that we are able to get to an SSH session to this VM right here in the Azure portal over private IP. And just to give you a view of the platform, this VM is indeed an Amazon Linux AMI, Amazon machine image that I'm SSHing to using private IP. Now, internally, we are using VPN to get private connectivity to AWS, VPC, set up that VPN connection, and then bring up an SSH. Azure VPN is another service owned by our team within Azure Networking. So the idea is that with Azure Bastion, we will integrate with VPN to provide a seamless experience so that using Azure Bastion, you're able to get to RDP SSH to your workloads, not only running in Azure, but beyond Azure as well, to your on-premise or other cloud environments too. This is the going forward view that I was just talking about, that with Azure Bastion and VPN, we will seamlessly provide a IPsec tunnel to reach to your workloads running on-premise and cross-cloud scenarios. So from a roadmap standpoint, want to take Azure Bastion. So from a security standpoint, we talked about AD integration with pivots of Azure Bastion. We will provide an integrated experience with AAD to provide multi-factor auth experience. We talked about RBAC and SSH key management. We also talked about ephemeral identity, and we talked about third-party auth integration through Azure Marketplace and our developer ecosystem. Now, what we also want to do is integrate with JIT NSG so that we provide a consistent security experience for connecting to Azure VMs for RDP and SSH. With Azure Bastion, although you don't need a public IP on your target VM, you still need to open port 3389 for your private IP. Now, let's say if you want to take it a step further, you want to keep that port 3389 also disabled or blocked. With integration with JIT NSG, you will be able to do that. And once an authenticated and authorized session request comes to Azure Bastion, Bastion will then use JIT NSG to toggle the rule, open the port, give you the session. And once the session ends, close down the port back again, so that you don't have to worry about managing those energies, managing or opening or blocking down those ports again and again for the purpose of the session. So that's JIT energy integration. That's also part of our roadmap. From a monitoring standpoint and auditing standpoint, we talked about recording RDP SSH sessions for later viewing as well as live audit as well. So you can watch the RDP and SSH sessions as they happen. And what we will also provide is diagnostic log experience, which is work in progress. What that will do is that will give you a view of who is connected to what VM from what IP at what time and for how long, so that you can get a view of who's connected right now and who connected from audit standpoint as well. We will provide some quick session management operations as well. So for instance, you can select from a list of ongoing sessions, select a particular session or a set of sessions and say force disconnect, so that those sessions are disconnected by Azure Bastion. From an experience standpoint, we do already support full screen experience for the web experience. So that's already part of the preview. At some point in time, we will also enable native client support. So your existing native applications like MSTSC, RDC Man, PuTTY, or other such similar client applications that you have been familiar with or used to connect to your VMs, you can still do that with Azure Bastion. So that's native client support. And the way we want to do that is without needing any of these client applications to change. They will still work as is and without exposing your VMs to public IP through Azure Bastion. Now, shareable URL is another interesting feature.
A quick question. When is the native client support coming? I know we had talked about this before. Just curious.
Yeah, so this will be sometimes early next year.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, so from a shareable URL standpoint, our goal here is for some customers, what we've realized is it's important for them to restrict their users from coming to Azure portal, and they still want to enable Bastion experience. So for those set of customers, they want to be able to do RDP SSH without coming to Azure portal. So for those experiences, we are building shareable URL. What that would do is that will allow you to create a URL for a session and hand it off to someone. This URL can be behind an AAD auth, so that whoever has this URL and is able to authenticate, they don't need to come to Azure portal. They don't details that would be able to see from Azure portal, but they have a restricted view and only get to the session by authenticating themselves using this URL. This is similar to how you share files or folders on cloud storage. So think of it as, imagine this is similar to that feature, wherein you create a URL for a session and hand it off to a user. This would work great in scenarios like you have contingent staff and you don't want to give Azure portal access to them just to get RDP or SSH to the VMs. So that's shareable URL. File transfer is another experience that we will enable through web experience. That's also part of our roadmap. Copy paste, richer experience for copy paste, so that you can copy paste files, copy paste images, and so on. And then audio support specifically for RDP. That's also part of our roadmap. From a connectivity standpoint, we do support RDP SSH over 443 in the provisioned VNet, which means that once you provision Bastion in a VNet, Bastion experience gets enabled for all VMs in that VNet. Now, some customers, they have hub spoke deployments, so that all of their infra stuff is in the hub VNet and their VMs are in the spoke VNet. So we will support peered VNets. That's further out. It's going to be next year. But once we start supporting peered VNets, what this would do is you would not need to provision Bastion in every of your, and the Bastion experience will get enabled for all VMs across all the peered VNets. So that's peered VNet. Another key feature that we have on our roadmap is Bastion on private IP. So today Bastion needs a public IP for 443 internet for inbound, so that portal is able to create sessions and give it to the user. We want to restrict it further. So for instance, if you have any form of private connectivity like again, you do not really still need a public IP on Bastion. Bastion can work behind a private IP connectivity as well. So that's Bastion on private IP. That is also in the works. And then we talked about using Azure Bastion to give you RDP SSH sessions to your workloads running outside Azure, both for on-premise and cross-cloud scenarios, which we call as beyond. So that's further out, but that's still part of our roadmap. From an extensibility standpoint, our vision is that we want to bring Azure Bastion experience to all potential Azure resources that you can RDP or SSH into. For instance, if you are familiar with Azure Labs, we will integrate with Azure Labs so that for instance, for your dev test labs, you still get the same RDP SSH secure experience directly in Azure portal for devices, for VM scale sets, for Azure Kubernetes service, for your container nodes. You can directly get to SSH from Azure portal using Azure Bastion. The DTL support is expected to land somewhere before mid of September for you to preview and try it out. So that's also work in progress. And for other resources, this will also land going forward. We also plan to add more. Sorry, please. Can you please repeat your question?
What does DTL stand for?
Sure. So DTL stands for Dev Test Labs. It's part of Azure Lab Services, which is another service in Azure. What that lets you do is it lets you create a set of VMs in a consistent configuration. Imagine a lab, so to say. So if you want, a bunch of VMs in the same config, potentially the same environment, so that you can replicate them and execute test cases. DTL works great in those scenarios. Now, if you have those VMs using Azure Lab Services and you want a similar RDP SSH experience that Bastion provides, that is DTL integration, which is in work in progress that will come out soon. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Say it again. DTL is a deep
Dev Test Labs.
Dev Test Lab. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Dev Test Labs. Yeah. It's part of Azure Lab Services. So it's a service that you can discover on Azure. You go to portal, type Azure Lab Services, and if you get to that service, it's an independent service of its own that you create your VMs through as a lab. So you don't directly get a VM, so to say, as you would typically get if you create a VM directly as an IaaS VM. You get a lab, but you get all the details and all the controls that you would typically get from a VM. So take a look. It's an interesting service, and we are integrating Bastion with that as well. It's been one of the #1 asks for us to provide that integration. So that will come out soon.
How many concurrent RDP and SSH sessions will Bastion support? Because that's a big limiting factor on jump boxes without having to buy CALs, etc.
Great question. So today in preview, we do not support scale units. We only support one scale unit by default. What that means is one scale unit will give you 25 RDP concurrent sessions, and the number of SSH sessions will be much more. That will depend on the traffic in that session and so on. But 25 concurrent RDP sessions are given with one scale unit. Going forward in GA, we hope to provide a control through which you can provision or configure Bastion with more number of scale units. So for instance, if you configure Bastion with 2 scale units, then Bastion will support 50 concurrent RDP sessions. If you want more, you want 75, you can set Bastion to 3 scale units. And then going forward at some point in time, we will make Bastion as auto scale so that you don't have to worry about setting the scale units. It will automatically size itself so that it's elastic and support more number of RDP or SS sessions as they come in or go.
Beautiful, thank you.
And so RDP SSH are first set of protocols that we will support. And like I said, we are building Bastion as a highly extensible service, which means that we will be able to add more protocols as plugins going forward. So we will add PowerShell, remote app debugging. So for instance, if you're debugging an app using Visual Studio and you don't want to expose your app, which is still under development, to public internet for debugging purposes, and you don't want to use VPN either, what you can do is you can use Azure Bastion and set your target in Visual Studio as Bastion, and then you will be able to debug your application running in your VNet through Azure Bastion as a debugging proxy. And if you want to access IaaS-based SQL in your VNet, That will also be a plugin that we will add at Bastion some point in time. And again, we will open that interface of setting up protocol plugins going forward in Azure Marketplace, so our developer ecosystem can build new set of protocols that our customers can buy from Azure Marketplace.
If a customer enabled Azure Security Center JIT, is that what you mean by the Circle JIT NSG that you're going to support in the future, or is this something different?
So that will be a modified version of that. We are working closely with the JIT NSG team on that. So we've identified good feedback items around that experience and how seamlessly we can integrate it with Azure Bastion. Today, when you provision an NSG or when you create an NSG and you want to toggle it, the entire NSG gets from a Bastion standpoint. What we really need is just that one RDP rule 13389 to be opened. We don't need to disable or toggle the entire NSG. So those are the level of fine-tuned controls that we will optimize for, so that we are able to toggle the right rule to enable port 3389 on a target VM from a just-in-time standpoint. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, that's the same JIT NSG in the Azure Security Center that we will integrate with, but only in an optimized way rather than just integrating as is.
Hey Ashish, quick time check. This is normally a 30-minute meeting. Do you still have quite a bit of material to present, or close to the end?
No, this is the last slide.
Okay.
This is the last slide. I'm almost done.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. And then at some point in time, we also plan to make Azure Bastion an on-demand VNet attach, so that you don't have to keep Bastion provisioned permanently in your VNet. It comes in when the first session request comes in, and it goes away when the last session goes away. It keeps your environment sealed in a way so that unless there is an authenticated and authorized session request, there is no endpoint that gets exposed that users can exploit. And once there is an authenticated request, the Bastion gets attached dynamically to your VNet, gives you the services it provides, and then goes away if you're not using it. We already talked about autoscale, and we will integrate with Azure availability zones so that we provide you the right level of resiliency you would expect to proof from zone level failures. So that's a zone redundancy for Azure Bastion. So that's from a vision standpoint. It's a multi-year roadmap that I just detailed, but this just gives you a glimpse of how committed we are and where we want to take Azure Bastion from an Azure service standpoint. We can take up more questions if you have. That's pretty much what I had to talk about to you today. Thank you for bearing with me.